All right. So listen, the message of Jesus, what Jesus taught, what Jesus modeled, all of that, the message of Jesus was completely radical. It was completely revolutionary. It was unlike anything the world had ever seen, and it absolutely changed the way the world approached religion at all. Here's the thing. That sentence I just said, it's true whether you actually believe in Jesus or not. It's funny how that works. Like a lot of times, like you can have historical changes, you can have changes to people, to various things, and it doesn't matter if it's true. It just is, right? Like it makes that change. You don't have to believe in Jesus to recognize that what Jesus said, did, taught, preached, all of that stuff completely altered the framework of the world and eventually created not just our religion, but kind of the framework for all the others too. The thing about it, though, is like our great superpower as human beings is our adaptability. And what I mean is this. We live in the United States of America. We have a state called Florida, right? And we have a state called Alaska. Those are very different places. Very different places, like in every possible way. And people live there. I don't know if you guys ever thought about like how crazy it is that human beings are like, I will live at the equator or I will live at the North Pole, and we can equally do it. The point is we get used to anything. Like whatever it is we do, we get used to. And so as Christians, we're so used to hearing about Jesus, I think, that we forget how radical and revolutionary and unheard of and world-changing Jesus actually is. Because we always hear it, right? Like it's just us. It's just what we do. We are as used to it as Floridians are to the sun and Alaskans are to the bears. We're just very used to it. And so I'd like us to get less used to it. I'd like us to be reminded of how wild and crazy this whole thing is. And so we need to tell a story about the time that the people of Israel lost God. About 1,000 years before the birth of Christ. The people of Israel were doing people of Israel stuff. They had a leader. His name was Eli. Eli had a couple of sons. Eli was both a priest and he was also a judge, and he was kind of the guy who went to everything, but he was very old and he was dying. Wasn't dying, but when they're getting there. And so he was very old, and he had these two sons. So that wasn't funny. I wasn't trying to be funny. You could tell when somebody's very old. That's all I'm trying to say. He had these two sons, and they were supposed to take over for him, but they were terrible. Just like real bad, just like horrible. So you can't, they didn't want to leave anything to these two sons. So what ended up happening instead was, God raised up this prophet. His name was Samuel, that he is kind of the main character to all of these stories. But this is kind of how he gets there. Right before Samuel was ready to take over as the leader of Israel, Eli goes to war against the Philistines. And he went to war. It's interesting when you read the Bible because, there's no reason given. It's just, they went to war. Because, what else are you going to do? You're a nation. You've got fighting men. They're a nation. They've got fighting men. Let's go. And so they go to war, and it's what they do. And if you know anything about the Philistines and the Israelites, they go back and forth. Like sometimes the Philistines win, sometimes the Jewish people win. There's the whole David and Goliath thing that happens like that. Goliath is a Philistine. They kind of go back and forth, but on this particular battle, it is completely one-sided. It is all Philistine all day. 4,000 Jewish people die. Basically, no one dies from the side of the Philistines. And so, you'd think you'd learn your lesson and say, cool, game over. We're going to go home and stop fighting this war. And you'd think that's what they would do, but that's not what the people of Israel decided. The people of Israel sort of took personally that they had lost to the Philistines, and they thought, well, we need to get back at them. And so they said, I know what we'll do. We'll take God with us. And I mean that in the most literal sense. They believed that God was in the Ark of the Covenant. This box. Fancy. Indiana Jones, that one. And so they have this box, and they said, okay, well, if we take God with us, then God will fight for us, and we'll win this battle because we've got God, and he's in this box, and he'll fight for us. And I know, I'm saying that somewhat flippantly, but we need to understand that in at the time, as far as we can tell in the ancient world, there's no such thing as a not holy war. Like, I would say this was a holy war, but that would be redundant. War is by definition holy. Like, if you look at like the Egyptian Empire, when they conquered and they became the Egyptian Empire, they believed that it was their gods who were fighting for them, one of which was the Pharaoh. They believed that it was actually a battle between our gods, right? The gods that belong to us, the gods that are for us, and your gods, the gods that you belong to and you own, and our gods, your gods. That's what it is. And yeah, fine, men would bleed and die and suffer for this, but at the end of the day, it wasn't so much a statement of a better nation, right? Or a better culture or a better race. It was a conversation about what better gods there were. Of course, not just the Egyptians. They were the big bad group at the time, and then they give way on at least on a world stage to the Assyrians. The Assyrians, we read about how cruel the Assyrians are. The Assyrians, they did things that they made you not want to fight them because you knew what would happen to you if you lost, right? They were terrible, just awful. But really, all they were was a reflection of their gods. Their gods were terrible. Their gods were cruel. Their gods were bloodthirsty. And so when you fought the Assyrians, you were not fighting just the Assyrians. You were fighting the Assyrians as they carried their gods into battle. And then when you lost, their gods did their stuff through them, and it was awful. And that's why you always surrendered to the Assyrians. Is why they got so big. This is the way it works. It was my God that I belong to, that belongs to me, versus your God that belongs to you. And so the Jews, being a nation like everybody else, says, we're going to take our God into battle. We're going to take this box. We're going to go, and this is what we're going to do. And the Philistines saw this, and they said, oh no. Probably in more flowery language than that. This is a sermon, guys. Let's just stick with oh no. And they said, we know the gods of Israel. Like they didn't have any idea that there'd only be one, so they said the gods. We know the gods of Israel, right? Like that's what we know that we know those gods. They conquered the Egyptians. We know the story of the Exodus. We know their gods. They destroy lots of people. We've got to get our hands on that God and those gods. And so the Philistines said, we're going to die if we don't fight like we've never fought before. The Jews thought, well, we've got the Ark of the Covenant, we'll be fine. We don't have to work all that hard, And the Philistines said, well, you've got the Ark of the Covenant, we got to work 10 times as hard. And 30,000 dead Jews later, the Philistines were taking the Ark of the Covenant home, having defeated the gods of the Jews that they decided they would steal and make their own. The story ends interestingly. They take the ark back, and they take the ark and they put it into the temple of their main god. His name was Dagon, and they took there's this giant, like you can imagine, like this big idol, this altar, and this is where they go, and they're mocking the Jews. They're mocking the Jewish gods because they put the ark under the altar. Like there's the altar winds, like Dagon is above the gods of the Jews. And so that's what they were doing. And so they go home, they're celebrating, they're doing all this stuff. And the next day they go back to the temple and Dagon has fallen down. And they're like, well, that's weird. Somebody must have, I don't know, drank too much or run into it. Probably Hank. That's what he does. They put it back up, they leave, they come back the next day, and now it's like a horror movie. It's like Paranormal Activity, right? Like the idol has fallen again, except now the idol is here and the head is over there. Just decapitated it, as if to say, like, well, that God can't see or, smell or hear or speak, think. And then its hands were over there, as if to say he can't do anything. And the rest of its body was literally in a position bowing before the Ark of the Covenant. And I'll be honest, this is the moment where I return that to sender. I've seen a few Paranormal Activity movies. It only gets worse from here, guys. This is like the opening act where they're like, what is going on, right? And then what happens after that, we've all seen Indiana Jones. That's when the plague came. For the next 7 months, Philistia, all of it was covered in plague. And they said, well, the gods of Israel must be killing us. And so they sent a message back to the new leader, Samuel. And they're like, hey, Samuel, do you want this back? Like, sorry, we won't take it again. And Samuel takes it back, and plague ends, and that's the end. It's a happy, chipper story, you know? It's the kind of story you teach in children's church and say, well, this is it, guys. Here's the Bible story. It's the kind of story that makes, has made Christians for like the whole time we've been a thing, for 2,000 years, look at that and say, like, I'm not sure that really happened. It may be like a metaphor, an allegory. And then other people will be like, no, I think it really did happen, and here's why. And like, it's that kind of a story where people are kind of going back and forth and trying to figure out what we do with it, right? Like, we read in the Bible that, like, we read in the New Testament, we read from Paul that, like, the scriptures are supposed to teach us how to live. And I mean, I don't know that story totally does that. I can think of a few bad lessons from it, like, don't do this. But regardless, like, it's that kind of a story. So I'm going to leave that to you. You are free to do whatever you want to do with this story in your own mind, your own faith, whatever. Great. We're not talking about that. What I'm going to say is this. That story, the reason I'm telling you it reflects what people were, and how people thought, and what people believed about God. You see, what we have to understand is there is no such thing as a God at that time in any written history that was not a local God. At most, a God might be the God of a nation, right? Like a God over all of this group of people, at most. Usually, the gods actually kind of came from like villages and regions and towns, and he's like, it's the God of that, and then it kind of, well, we'll just believe that, and it's always local. It's funny that we don't think about it this way, but when we say that the God of the Old Testament, the God of the Bible, right, the God that is Jesus in the flesh, when we talk about God, we don't think, like, when we say the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we don't often put together that that's describing a local God. That's the God not of even like a country. It's not even the God. That's the God of a family line. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. It's the God of a family. You honestly can only get there's only so much more local you could get than that. And so, of course, the Jewish people approach God like a local God. The Jewish people do this because that's what everybody does. And imagine, like, kind of the chaos. Again, we live in the United States of America. We have 50 states. Imagine if every state had their own God. And then we were all competing with one another about whose God is cooler. And one day, like, Idaho was like, man, you know what I want to do? I want to see if we can kill all of Georgia. Right? And then, like, Nebraska is like, not if we get there first. I mean, imagine the chaos. And then imagine, like, you meet somebody from Mexico and they're like, well, we don't believe in any of your gods. Like, we've got all of these other ones from all of the, Mexican states and regions. That's what the ancient world was like. And the God of the Bible is literally, to them, just a local God of a family that ends up becoming a nation, right? Like, that's how it worked. And all of that's wrong. That's not the way God works. There are no such thing as the gods. There is no such thing as a local God. There is no such thing as a God that you own, right? There's no such thing as your personal Jesus. There's no such thing as any of that. Like, none of that. They thought it was. And so they lived that way, and they wrote that way, and they left behind their stories for us that way. But none of that was true. And a few hundred years after Samuel and that whole story, that war happened. A few hundred years after that, Isaiah is this prophet, and he is preaching or teaching and doing the stuff he's doing. And Isaiah is revolutionary. Like, he is talking to God in a way that no one else ever has before. He is getting information from God that no one else has ever gotten. And he looks at this whole situation and he says, I don't think that's who God is. And it makes sense why he would say that, by the way. If the God of the Bible is actually God, you realize like the first page of the Bible describes God creating everything and everybody. So like you're literally, like if you believe in local deities, you are contradicting the first words of the scriptures, right? But Isaiah, like nobody's getting it. So Isaiah's trying to convey who God is and trying to help figure out what's going on. And we read in Isaiah chapter 56, him explain who God is and what God is doing in a really radical way. And this is what we read, Isaiah chapter 56, he says, this is what the Lord says, be just and fair to all. Do what is right and good. For I am coming soon to rescue you and to display my righteousness among you. A little later, he says, don't let foreigners who commit themselves to the Lord say, the Lord will never let me be part of his people. A little later again, he says, I will also bless the foreigners who commit themselves to the Lord, who serve him and love his name, who worship him and do not desecrate the Sabbath day of rest, and who hold fast to my covenant. I will bring them to my holy mountain of Jerusalem, and I will fill them with joy in my house of prayer. I will accept their burnt offerings and sacrifices because my temple will be called a house of prayer for all nations. For the sovereign Lord, who brings back the outcasts of Israel, says, I will bring others too, besides my people, Israel. I mean, you can't get more direct than that. That God says, hey, I'm not just here for Israel. I'm here for the people who are not Israel. Like there's two categories. There's Israel and there's not Israel. And he says, yeah, I'm going to bless not Israel the same way I'm blessing Israel. Similarly, similarly when we talk about the Jews and the Gentiles, like these are the categories that Isaiah is speaking in. And what he says is that God will welcome foreigners and outcasts. People who are not of the family line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And outcasts. Not just people who are not Jews, but people who, they're explicitly barred because of some sin or some condition or some whatever. Isaiah preaches the God of heaven and earth is actually the God of heaven and earth. I know, novel concept. But see, the problem is, and if you guys understand where I'm going with this, like the Jews are not like, oh, okay, that's not what happens. They just pretend that's not in their Bible and they just move on. But you can kind of understand why, though. Like if you put yourself in the position, this is something like 800 years before the birth of Jesus. 7, 8, the timelines are always a little sketchy. Isaiah is out here preaching, teaching. He lives at the time of the Assyrians. Remember how I talked about these guys that because their gods were cruel, they were cruel? That's when he's writing this. You'd have pushback. What are you talking about, everybody? What are you about foreigners and outcasts? What are you talking about? Like, so we don't have a God now? No, we can't do that. If the Assyrians have a god, and then they give way to the Babylonians who have a god, and they give way to the Greeks who have a bunch of gods, and they give way to the Romans who got a bunch of gods, right? The names change, but the stories stay the same. You can understand why they would say, but if everybody else has this, and if everybody else is going to war, and if everybody else needs an army, and everybody else needs protection, what about us? And so Isaiah preaches it. It's in the Bible. But they don't live it out at all. And by the time Jesus is born, I mean, yeah, some progress had been made. I'm not going to pretend like 1,000 years didn't have progress. But theologically, not really. Right? Like, Jesus is born into a world where there is an empire. Not unlike the Assyrians or the Egyptians, who believes that he has an emperor who believes that he is divine, just like, the Egyptians and the Assyrians and everybody else. And you've got to get in line because our gods are bigger and stronger than yours. I mean, it's basically the same thing. But Jesus starts doing some stuff that's funny. We read about it in the Bible. But Jesus starts actually living out in a radical, revolutionary, world-changing way. He acts out this belief and this message of Isaiah. Like there's that time when a Roman guy comes up to him and says, hey, I need you to heal my slave. Can you do that? And Jesus does it without question. And then actually says, that guy has amazing faith. Did you guys see that? You guys should be more like this Roman. That was probably not overly popular. There was a time when a Canaanite woman comes up to Jesus like, hey, I got this daughter. And Jesus like, say no more. I got her. No problem. Heals her. Done. There's that time Jesus tells us this parable about a good Samaritan. Right? A good Samaritan who is good in the way that the Jewish religious leaders weren't. I mean, you probably should have realized that was coming given that time that Jesus was in Samaria and there was that woman who was at the well. Right? And she's, she talks to him about theology. And he has a real, like, deep conversation with a Samaritan woman breaking, like, every social norm. But certainly, highlighting, that the Samaritans and the Jews are, together. What I love about the book of John is the end of the book of John. John says, oh, by the way, Jesus did so many more things that we did not, we didn't write down. And so what I love is I can name you like 4 or 5 times where Jesus is explicitly reaching out beyond Israel's borders, just like absolutely doing that. But what I love is that John tells us that Jesus did, like, we've written down like that much of this, which he's just telling us the type of stuff Jesus did. Jesus reaches out beyond Israel's borders. I'm imagining like 4 days a week. Like if we read that he does this several times and we read that we only have a sliver of what he's doing, this is just something Jesus always did. In the same way that, like, we have all these parables written down, but you're aware that that's like, like chapter 1 of a whole book of parables, right? Like that's how this works. And so what I'm saying is Jesus constantly, continually, over and over reached beyond this family and showed the God that I am showing you, the God that I am. This is not a local God. This is not the God of a family. This is a God of everyone. Most dramatically, there's that time that he preached about being a shepherd on Hanukkah. You guys know Hanukkah, right? I didn't know what Hanukkah was until Adam Sandler put out that song. And that's when I learned that you can rhyme marijuana with Hanukkah. What a wordsmith Adam Sandler was. He's not dead. He probably is still. I'm sorry. We're off track. Historically speaking, for Hanukkah, it's all about a holy war, because what else is there? It's a couple hundred years before the birth of Christ. And there's this group called the Seleucids. They're like Greeks-ish. I usually just call them Greeks because it's less confusing that way. But there's the Seleucids, the Seleucid Empire. They conquer Israel under this king named Antiochus. And Antiochus, he wants the Jewish religion just gone. And the reason is because the Jews are so annoying. Like, he conquered the Jews, and the Jews had the audacity to just keep fighting back. You know how we would? I think that's... Anyway, they just kept fighting back. And so Antiochus says, well, I got to get rid of the Jews. I have to. We got to get rid of them. Their religion has got to go. And so he looks and he says, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to make it illegal. And he makes it illegal. And you know what happened? The Jews are like, yeah, fat chance. And then he's like, well, you're not allowed to have, circumcise anybody anymore. And they're like, watch us. We'll do at-home circumcisions. We don't care about germs. We don't know they exist. And then Antiochus is like, all right, well, here's what I can do. I'm going to take the temple and I'm going to desecrate it so you don't want to go there ever again. And so he took this giant hog and he sacrificed it and he covered the altar in the temple with pig's blood, which I can only assume is where Stephen King got the idea for in Carrie. I don't think that's true. That part I'm not telling the truth about. The Jews were like, okay, that was actually horrible. We didn't like that. We're actually gonna, you're picking a fight you don't want right now. And Antiochus is like, oh, am I? And then he put this altar to Zeus. the local god of the Greeks. And he said, we're going to put this altar to Zeus in the temple. And the Jews said, well, okay, so you did it. We're either going to all die or you're all going to die. And it was kind of exactly like that Philistine Jew thing, right? It was kind of just on the other foot. History's funny that way. The oppressor becomes the oppressed constantly, and then the oppressed becomes the oppressor. Like, we always just kind of trade roles. And so the Jews are like, okay, well, we're going to be just the same. And they attack the Seleucids in a way that, like, the Seleucids have no idea what's coming. And they win. And they take back the temple. And they said, well, of course God helped us. And they've got these stories about miraculous things. Well, Hanukkah is celebrating all of those events. I mean, mainly the God parts, but like that's the stuff that was going on at the time. And they're celebrating this all the way back in the first century. Like they decided, I don't know how hard it is to make a holiday, but they jumped right on top of that one. Like, just, well, this is a holiday, this is what we're doing. And so Jesus is at Jerusalem. He's at the temple during this celebration. And everybody wants to know what's going on with him. Like, people are asking, like, are you really the Messiah, the Christ? What's going on? Like, what are you doing? And part of what he says, we read in the Gospel according to John, chapter 10. Jesus says, all who came before me were thieves and robbers. The true sheep did not listen to them. Yes, I am the gate. Those who come in through me will be saved. They will come and go freely and will find good pastures. The thief's purpose is to steal and kill and destroy. My purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. A little later, he says, I am the good shepherd. I know my own sheep, and they know me, just as my Father knows me, and I know the Father. So I sacrifice my life for the sheep. I have other sheep, too, that are not in this sheepfold. I must bring them also. They will listen to my voice, and there will be one flock with one shepherd. I cannot stress how offensive that was. like imagine, I mean, just, I'm trying to even think of it. Like, I'd say like George Washington, but none of y'all are going to get that uptight about a George Washington thing. Like, Jesus saying everybody who came before him were thieves and robbers. And look, that's a metaphor. It's really important we understand what Jesus is saying there, okay? That's an illustration. Jesus is not literally a shepherd, and we are not literally sheep. I don't think. Like, we're not like, so the illustration is Jesus is the shepherd, not really, but that describes his role. We are sheep, not really, but it describes our role. And then you've got those who came before him are the thieves and the robbers. What he's saying is they didn't speak correctly for God. That's what he's saying, is they didn't get it. As they were trying to shepherd the people, as they were trying to lead the people, they were leading people away from God because they didn't know where God was. When we talk about the Jews believing in a local deity that belongs to them, they were wrong. But just like everybody else believed in a local deity that belonged to them, the Jews said, we will too. And so Jesus says these people who came before me, including, oh, by the way, the people you're celebrating at this party. It's like going to a birthday party and being like, well, the birthday girl, she's ugly. It's not her party. She can't cry if she wants to. It's my party. Like, imagine if your 8-year-old said that. What would you even do? You're clearly raising a psychopath. But like that's what Jesus was doing. Like, from a religious sense, he's saying all these people you loved. It's hilarious to me, and I did this for a long time, that it's John 10:10. It says the thief's purpose is to steal and kill and destroy. We teach that as Satan most of the time. Jesus was talking about the Jewish religious leaders. That's funny. Got a backhanded way. But what Jesus was saying was all these people led you away from God. I am the one who brings you to God. That's me. I am the gate. I am the sheepfold. I am the shepherd. Come to me. And then if you want to know what's different about Jesus, That's when he mentions the other sheep. Not of this flock. And I mean, going back to the second the ink was dry on this book, the church said, oh, he's talking about Gentiles. He's talking about Greeks and Romans and Samaritans and everyone. And he says, I'm going to take all of these people, and there's going to be one flock with one shepherd. Because there is no such thing as a local God. There's no such thing as a God that belongs to you. This is one of the most significant things. It's radical, it's revolutionary, and the early church understood that, which is why they hammer it so much over and over. So much of our New Testament is hammering this point home. And so it shouldn't surprise us that we read it in Paul's conversation with Timothy about his about the mystery of our faith. He says this in 1 Timothy chapter 3. Paul writes, without question, this is the great mystery of our faith, that Christ was believed in throughout the world. That's not anything you ever would have seen from any other deity. And if you are tracking with me, you should probably have some questions right now. Hey, but what about that? Oh man, what about this? What about those people? I need you to know I'm going to answer none of those questions. Furthermore, I am uninterested in fielding them. Because look, at the end of the day, all we're doing is trusting Jesus anyway. Those questions revolve around Jesus' job, not mine, not yours. Furthermore, Paul called this a mystery. Like, we're not going to know how all of this works. Right? What we know is that we have broken the world and Jesus is putting it back together. I don't know how he's doing it exactly in this case. I don't know how he's doing it exactly in most cases. Or any cases. But I trust, as a Christian, that that's what he's doing. And so look, it is mysterious. This should make us humble and say, I don't know. This should make us curious and ask questions and grow in our faith and try to figure things out. This should make us have faith, not a desire to look for certainty. And I'm not sure how all of this works out, but I can tell you this. At the end of the day, this is where we would need to leave. If what we're saying is true, then the most radical thing Jesus actually taught us about our lives is that it is not in any way about us. It's not about us. And you can say, what do you mean us? Pick one. A nation? Not about us. A race? Nationality? Not about us. Gender? Definitely not that. Right? Sexuality? Political beliefs? Oh my goodness, I can't stress enough how much it's not about that. Denomination? Church? Definitely not about that. Belief system that we hold very dearly because our grandmothers taught it to us. Definitely not about that. None of this is about us because God does not belong to us. We belong to God. And so our job is not to try to mold God into our image. Our job is to say we are made in God's image. Now, how can I be molded more into that image? How can I lean more into that image? I know that objectively I was made in the image of God, but how can I live that image? In the way I treat people, in the way that I listen and have empathy and sympathy, the way I think through situations, the way I'm rational. Right? Like, God is not a God of chaos. Look around, it's rational. It fits together. We're supposed to think and reason. How do I live this image out in my prayers and what I see as success? What my goals are. What I'm doing on Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday afternoon. You see, it's not about us molding God. It's about us being molded. We're not special because we're Christians. We're not special because we're saved. We're not special because we know the truth or believe the right things. We're special because Jesus said so. And he said so about everybody else too. At the end of the day, it's not about us. God has never belonged to us. He never will. And how that plays out and works out, I don't know. That's a mystery. But for us, we can really, really lean into that humility and put our pride to the side and say, it's never about me. It's always about Christ. Always. This morning on our 5th week, we got one more. 5th and almost last series of our series with the Pringles man made into a question mark. And as we talk about this mystery, as we talk about Paul talking to Timothy, this is what we learn. This is the lesson. Our 5th lesson about Jesus being believed in throughout the world is this. God does not belong to us. The whole world belongs to Jesus like a flock belongs to a shepherd. God does not belong to us. The whole world belongs to Jesus like a flock belongs to a shepherd. We have an invitation each week. We're invited to take God up on the offer of knowing him and having faith and embracing him and living this image of God out. Baptism, we were to repent and be baptized. It sounds like two things. It's really just one. In repentance, we say, I'd like to turn my back on the things that are not of Christ. And in baptism, we embrace Christ just as he was dead, buried, and raised, that we are dead, buried, and raised. Never made a decision. Nice warm baptistry. We can do that anytime. Let's talk. If you're an immersed believer in Christ and you're looking for a perfect church home, it is not it. This is not it. Like, absolutely not. Like, I don't know if you can tell. Like, oh, my goodness, how all over the place we are this morning. But we're here, right? We're not a perfect church, but we do serve a perfect God. We want to connect. We want to call. We want to cultivate. We want to meet new people, share the gospel group, but we do it. And we just want to be people who decenter ourselves from the conversation. It is not about us. It is always about Christ, his work, and how we can follow him. As we stand,